Hey, good afternoon. My name is Michael White. I'm a real estate broker with RE/MAX Integrity Realty. We're based out of Denver, North Carolina. And yes, that's right. It's time for another fun and exciting video blog. Woo! Yeah, gotta love it. Social media. Woo! Okay, today's fun and exciting topic is what's the difference between earnest money and due diligence fee? Yes, I know, fun and exciting. So what is earnest money? Well, earnest money is more or less a good faith deposit made by the buyer to the seller at the time of an offer. Pretty cut and dry, pretty basic, right? A couple more things to consider. Typically, sellers like to see offers that have a large amount of earnest money. They consider that to be a commitment of the buyer to purchase the property. So the more money that the buyer is willing to put down, the seller believes there's a bigger commitment, and therefore it is less likely that the buyer will back out of a deal if they have a large earnest money deposit, put down as an offer. But keep in mind, though, the earnest money amount is negotiable. That a buyer can make an offer with no or little or no earnest money, and the seller can either accept it or reject it, and they can negotiate back and forth until they finally come to an agreement of how much earnest money needs to be deposited. So again, it is 100% negotiable. Now, where does the money go once they agree upon the amount? That's a good question. So typically, at least in the state of North Carolina, the firm of the listing agent is the one responsible for handling the earnest money. Now, the state mandates certain days it takes they have to deposit into their account. They have certain accounting guidelines and that kind of thing. But the listing firm will be the one responsible for the handling of the earnest money. Now, things move along. We get to closing, and it's time to prepare the closing documents. The listing firm will write a check to the real estate attorney. The real estate attorney will then more or less produce the closing documents, prepare the closing statement, and essentially what happens is the buyer receives a credit back for the earnest money. So essentially the earnest money is applied to the purchase price of the property, and therefore it lowers it more or less. So it's sort of like a prepayment, I guess you could call it. Now keep in mind, if there's a breach in the contract, then the buyer forfeits the earnest money to the seller. So the only time the seller actually gets to hold the earnest money is when there's a breach in the contract. Otherwise, the earnest money is held by, again, the listing firm. So that's essentially earnest money in a nutshell. Now, what's due diligence fee? Now, due diligence fee is a separate fee that the buyer pays the seller. And essentially what's happening is that the buyer buys time from the seller in order to evaluate the property. Now, when they buy the time, they create what they call a due diligence period. Now, there's a specific start date and a specific ending date to that due diligence period. And during that period, the buyer has the right to check out the property. They may do home inspections. They may get their financing arranged. They can evaluate the property any way they want to during that period. Now, keep in mind that due diligence period is a negotiable item, as well as the due diligence fee. That's negotiable. So the buyer may offer $1, want to buy 30 days for $1. The seller can reject that and say, no, I'll give you 30 days for I'll give you 30 days worth for $500. So again, they negotiate back and forth until they come to an agreement on how much that due diligence period will be and what the due diligence fee will be. Now, a key thing to remember here, the seller gets to keep that due diligence fee regardless of what happens to the contract. So as soon as that check is written to the seller from the buyer, the seller can go cash that check, go spend it, do whatever he wants to with it. As soon as he gets the check from the buyer, he can go spend it. He doesn't have to give it back. It's not credited back to him. He can go spend it. It's his money. Now, another key point to remember is that during that due diligence period, the buyer will be evaluating the property, and the buyer can decide anytime during that period whether they want to opt into the contract or opt out. If the buyer decides they want to walk away from the contract during that period, they can do so, and then they just walk away from it, and they don't forfeit their earnest money. They get their earnest money back. Seller can't do anything about that. So again, just to recap, the buyer can opt in or opt out of the contract during that due diligence period. Once you go past the due diligence period, then essentially the buyer is committed to buying the property, and if they decide to breach the contract after the due diligence period, then the seller will get to keep the earnest money. So that's it. That's in a nutshell. That's the difference between earnest money and due diligence fee. Hope that clarified things. If you have any questions, please give me a call. All my contact information is coming up on the next screen, so please stand by and wait for it. Thank you for watching. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good day. Bye-bye.